Okay, good evening, everybody. I'm glad you could join us. Today we have a Zoom meeting with Hanna Barag, a very prominent CheckPoint member, and she will introduce herself and the CheckPoint movement, organization. Thank you, Hanna.
Well, good evening to everyone. Unfortunately, I don't see you, which is difficult, but I know you are there. And as you all know, my name is Hanna Barag. I was born in Palestine at the time, in Haifa. I'm 88 years old. I've been a member of Mahsom Watch since 2001. And I am the mother of 2 daughters and the grandmother of 5 grandchildren and the great-grandmother of 1 great-grandchild, who's only a baby. And I live in Jerusalem, where I'm here in Jerusalem since 1958. I have served in the Israeli army. I been to an officer's course. I have studied sociology and international relationships at the Hebrew University. I did finish my studies. I lived abroad for several years, both in Europe, in England, in the United States, Germany. I'm going to, whenever I say, from now on, whenever I say I mean us, the women of Mahsom Watch, even though we have different ideas about different subjects, but we're still one group and we belong to each other. And so even if I say I really represent the whole group. And I'm very glad and I feel very proud that you took the time to come and listen to us. Mahsom Watch, as you might know, is an organization of Israeli women. Our strange name, which is in 2 languages, which has bothered us ever since we started, has a history of its own. Because when we first wanted to get we started in February 2001, at the midst of the second Intifada. And we wish to become the Israeli branch of the largest human rights organization in the world, Human Rights Watch. And in order to belong, we needed the word watch in our name. They looked at us at the time and they didn't think that we are serious. And they rejected us. And we got stuck with this strange name. And later on, they regretted that they rejected us and they thought that we are not serious. They never thought that we would survive so many years and do our work for all those years. So then they wanted us to join again, but by that time we had our own way and we didn't want to join any longer, but the name stayed. And this is why we have this very strange and unusual name. And the word Mahsom, which is part of our name, Mahsom Watch, in Hebrew has a different meaning than it has in English. In Hebrew, when you say Mahsom, you really mean stand and don't go anywhere. It's not a checkpoint in the sense that you are checked and you go. The Hebrew meaning of Mahsom is that you're there to stay, don't go. So it's interesting how we got at the end involved in, and since the Israelis have realized that the word Mahsom is a hard word, they changed and they call it crossroads, ma'avarim, passages. They changed the name. And we call the checkpoints according to the Palestinian village or city that they are next to. When we talk about the checkpoint that is between Jerusalem and Bethlehem, we call it the Bethlehem checkpoint, or we give it the number of the checkpoint. The checkpoints have numbers. we call it checkpoint 300. We don't call it what the Israelis call it. And if you go into our website, you will see that you'll find it difficult to find them on a map, other than our own map, which is there on our website, is because we call them differently than the government calls them, than the public calls them. The public calls the Bethlehem checkpoint, the Rachel's checkpoint, not checkpoint, crossings, Rachel's crossing, because it's next to Rachel's tomb. And we don't call it that name, because this is the occupational idea of hiding the fact that it is between Palestine and Israel. So this is just in case we're going to our website and look for the different checkpoints that I'm maybe going to mention over our talk. The other thing I wanted to say, if you want to stop me in between and ask a question, don't hesitate. This should be like a talk between us, not a lecture in the sense that I'm lecturing. So feel free to ask, even if it's in between what I'm going to say. So when we first started our main activity in the first decade, between 2001, we started in February 2001. And in a minute, I'll tell you how we started. Our main idea at the time was that we will monitor the military checkpoints and report and document the ongoings there. But when the checkpoint procedure became more bureaucratic, which we will talk about, and gradually less hands-on, since we decided to expand into various slightly different areas, all part of the struggle to expand into, to deal with freedom of movement of the Palestinians. Even if we talk about health or education or work or anything of that people might need, it all depends on the fact that they can move freely from place to place. And that is part of maybe the most important issue in the occupation, that you don't have this freedom of movement. And everything we do and everything we think about and everything we say always comes back to the fact that there's no freedom of movement, which is a basic human right. And if you look it up, you will see that anyone who talks about human rights talks about freedom of movement. We are now maybe 100 women. At the heights of our time, we were at 800 women. But people get older, and we didn't start as young people, because from the beginning, in order to join, you needed to have the freedom of time, because we had 2 shifts at the beginning, and they started at hours where mothers or people who work were still in the working force couldn't join, because we started at the time first at 7 o'clock, and one of our biggest achievements, which we keep on talking about, and we mention it at every occasion, that we managed to open the checkpoints not at 7 o'clock, but at 4 o'clock in the morning. And if you'd ask me a question, you regard this as a success? Obviously, the success would have been if there were no checkpoints. But you have to compromise. In the place where we are, we compromise, and at the end I will say something about this compromise, which is not an easy issue. So now we are, I think, 100 volunteers, but not 100 women go out. Maybe 20 or 30 people actually still go out, but they do other things, which are not less important. And I'll talk about other projects. We are an interesting organization because we are an organization without any hierarchy or any administration or any office. We work from home, and each woman, each member has a voice. And we need to come to compromises in order that we can agree on something, and it's not easy. And at the beginning, we thought that we would behave in what I would call a feministic way. And we would come to agreements, and when we all agree, we will do whatever we decide to do. Today, I know that since we don't especially deal with gender problems, it's not on our ticket. Gender is not that if a woman comes and asks for help, we don't help, but regular gender issues are not on our ticket. And we also don't, I always thought that we wouldn't fight, and when we do fight between ourselves, and sometimes it's not really very pleasant. But from the other point of view, there are not many grassroots organizations that manage to survive as long as we have survived. Now, in order to give you I thought about all the experiences that I experienced over these we started in February 2001, and I joined in December 2001, so a few months after they first started. And it's an interesting story how we started, because the founding members, the founding women, were actually members of Women in Black, which you might know. So, if not, if anyone asks, I will later. And they stood at the corner with a banner, "We are against the occupation," and they demonstrated every Friday in black clothes for 2 hours. And one day, a very famous Israeli writer, journalist, Amira Haas, came. She was a friend of most of us. And she came around when they were there. I wasn't part of Women in Black, but they were demonstrating there, and she came and said, "What are you doing here? Just a few kilometers away, maybe 6 kilometers, you can walk there. There is a checkpoint, the Bethlehem checkpoint. Why don't you go there and look what's happening there?" So the 3 founding mothers, one of them is Judith Keshet, who is still living here in Israel. The other 2 have left. Decided on a Saturday morning that they will go to the checkpoint. Now, Judith Keshet is an observant Jewess, and she doesn't drive on Shabbat, on Saturday. So they walked. It's in walking distance. You can walk it. February is a beautiful time here. It's spring. It's not cold and it's not hot, and they walked down to the checkpoint. They left the house after they had a Saturday morning breakfast, which is part of the tradition, and Judith went to pray. When all this was finished, around 11:30, they walked to the checkpoint. When they arrived there, everyone that saw them was astonished. "What are you doing here?" The soldiers came out. "Who are you? What are you doing here? It's dangerous. They're going to kill you," whatever. And the Palestinians didn't know what they see. That they didn't see Israeli women coming to checkpoints. It was a novel thing, a new thing. And of course, the women themselves had no idea what they're going to find there. And in this chaos of feelings, soldiers said, "What are you doing here?" And Judith Keshet said, "We came to see the sun rising, but the sun doesn't rise at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. It rises at 5 o'clock in the morning." But no one realized that something is wrong here. It doesn't fit. And then they came back and said to their friends, "Listen, we have seen something that needs to be observed." And that's how we started. And then they asked friends to join. And slowly, when I came, we were maybe 15 women. And my first experience was that we met at one of the founding mothers' home, and we decided on certain things, among other things, that they were going to be a women's organization, which we knew from the beginning, and that we are not going to have, that we're going to be one woman, one voice, and how we're going to operate, and how we're going to arrange the shifts, and all these things that were very, very necessary to start. Now, I've decided to tell you something of my personal experience, which will give you a highlight of what this occupation is about, because all we listen and hear is physical attacks and land grabbing and terrible things. But some of the things, when you read or hear, you don't even realize how violent they are, because there's no hitting and there's no physical violence, but they are still so violent. And if you change the name of the man, that the story that I'm going to tell, instead of calling him Muhammad, I will call him Hanna, and you will call him whatever Ruti or whatever your name is, then you realize how terrible this story is, how horrible and how violent it is, even though there is no violence, no one hits anyone, and nothing physical happens. So I'll tell you the story, and then I'll explain what I told you, what you should learn from all this. So we are talking about, let's call him Muhammad. It's not his name, but let's call him Muhammad because it's a very common name. He is originally from Hebron, which is in the West Bank. People in the West Bank have a green ID. The color of their ID is green. People who are Israelis, for instance, I have a blue ID. And from now on, when I say a green ID, you realize that I'm talking about people in the West Bank. When I say a blue ID, these are people who live inside what Israel calls Israel. So he comes from Hebron and he has a green ID. He's a Palestinian. He has married a young woman who is officially a Jerusalem resident. Now, the Palestinians in Jerusalem they're not citizens. They are residents. They are like people in the United States who have a green card but cannot vote because they are not citizens. They are residents. And maybe some of you are residents in Europe, wherever you live, or in Austria, wherever you live. So you have to realize he married a woman who has a blue ID that gives her freedom of movement, but she's a resident. She's not a citizen. So these residents, they can vote to the municipality and deal with the water and the sewage, but their political life is out of bounds. They have no say in their political life. So they are parents of 5 small children. The family lives in Anata, which is part of Jerusalem. People there are Jerusalemites. They live in a high-rise, 7 floors, and their apartment is on the 7th floor. Muhammad, because he has a green ID, and they are not allowed into Jerusalem without permits. And here we come to the bureaucracy of the occupation, which we will talk about. So he is basically illegally in his own home. That's where he lives. But he's illegally there because he's not allowed to be in Jerusalem. He's a Palestinian with a green ID. So he also has a little problem. He's a young man, he's only 35 years old. And as such, he's not eligible to apply for family unification, meaning to have the same permits that his wife, who is a Jerusalemite, has. He doesn't have that, he's illegally here. When can he ask for that? When he's over 45 years old. So we have another 10 years to go, if we all live. Another 10 years to go. Meanwhile, every time he leaves his home, where he permanently lives, he's illegal and can be arrested. And he will be. There is another minor problem here. He must prove that the focus of his life over the past 2 years has been in Jerusalem. A fact which you can it's very difficult to prove that if you are illegally in Jerusalem. How are you going to prove that the center of your life was here when you supposedly haven't been here at all? So a little problem. The other problem they have is that his wife suffers from severe from clinical depression after she gave birth. And in her state, it's not advisable to be living on the 7th floor. You know, these people, they're sick, and sometimes they have ideas that it's not good to live on the 7th floor. Because she's a Jerusalem resident, she's entitled to health insurance, which is, every one of us has health. All the Israelis have health insurance. It's compulsory. It's not your choice. And she receives ongoing psychiatric treatment because she's sick. Now, she can't go alone to these treatments. She needs someone to accompany her because, you know, she's very, very, very sick. She's a very nice woman, by the way. I've been dealing with them for many, many years. So Muhammad got a permit, which I can't tell you how difficult it was to get this permit, to accompany his wife to the treatments. But he only can go from the checkpoint directly to the house of his wife, take her on the shortest way to the doctors, back home, and go back to the checkpoint and leave, which of course he doesn't do. He lives with his wife. They have 5 children. They didn't come by the storm. They came somehow. So, of course, he's constantly in violation of the rules, and he's in constant danger. And he was caught several times, but at the beginning, they let you go. After a while, the second time and the third time, it gets more serious and more serious. And finally, he was caught and was arrested. The woman, the wife, remained alone in her home with 5 children. So if you have an imagination, you get hysterical. And we know these people for many years. We've helped him get permits, and they've been our, what I call clients in brackets, for many years. So we realized that she's in grave danger. This is a dangerous situation. So we were very upset. What are we going to do? So we had this idea that we asked the husband's father, who lives in Hebron, to come and be with his sister, with his daughter-in-law. How come he can come and his son can't come? Because he's a man of 65. And if you are over 55, you don't need a permit any longer. But getting into Jerusalem doesn't mean that you're allowed to stay in Jerusalem. You can come visit and you have to go back home. But he took the risk and he stayed with his daughter-in-law. Meanwhile, we are getting very anxious. We want to get the husband out of prison and do something about it. So we go to the public defense. Now, they don't treat Palestinians. They are only there for the Israelis. But we managed to talk them into accepting this case. And we were lucky, very lucky, that the man who was appointed, the lawyer who was appointed to us, was very supportive, and he understood the situation, and he was pro helping Muhammad, and he did his best to help Muhammad. So now we have the father-in-law with the mother and the children, and the husband is in prison. So the lawyer comes into the picture, and we go to court, and he manages to persuade the judge that he should let Muhammad go. We are all very happy. We think the problem is solved. How naive we were. What did we think? That he's going to let him go to Jerusalem? How did we have this crazy idea? Of course not. He sent him to Ramallah. What good does this do? She doesn't live in Ramallah. She lives in Jerusalem. We need him here. Obviously, what does Muhammad do? He comes illegally back to Jerusalem. What can he do? Then he had this wonderful idea. He's going to take his whole family to Hebron to stay meanwhile with his parents until we find a solution for a permit. Because the minute he broke the law and used his permit to accompany his wife for living in Jerusalem, basically, his chances of getting a new permit are very limited, very, very limited. So all hell breaks out, and we try to get him back from Ramallah. We are not successful, and the day of his court hearing comes. Now, in order to go to court, which was in Ashkelon, which is by the sea, by the Mediterranean Sea, not in Jerusalem even, he needs a permit. Meanwhile, he still has the permit to accompany his wife to medical treatment. And a Palestinian cannot have two permits at the same time, even though they have no connection to each other. So he has to give up one of them. Now you figure out what does a person do in such a situation? What would you do? What would I do? How can you make such a choice? Both these things are absolutely necessary. So he gives up the accompanying his wife. The lawyer and we tell him that's what you should do. And we managed to get him to Ashkelon. Don't think that this is easy to go on the buses. So we decide to find some volunteer who drives in there, which we are not allowed to do. We are not allowed to have a Palestinian in a car that has an Israeli license plate. But we take the risk and we take him to Ashkelon. Now, the judge in Ashkelon, we were lucky. He realized the complication of the situation and he gave him a temporary permit for the next 6 months. Now, this is like finding gold on your staircase. It's an unheard of thing. You need to be a human being, an unusual judge to give such a permit. So now we have a permit for him to be in Jerusalem, which we never dreamt that we would get. But he still needs to accompany his wife. And the permit to stay in Jerusalem doesn't allow him to go with his wife to wherever he wants to go. So we need another permit for him to accompany his wife. So now we are in the happy situation that he has a permit to accompany his wife and to stay for the next 6 months in Jerusalem. Now, why do I tell you this whole story? Because I wanted to show you that the occupation doesn't have to be violent. It needs something else. What do people do? What the other countries do when they wanted to occupy an area? We don't have enough soldiers to have a soldier at every corner. This is impossible. So you use the bureaucracy and you make it impossible for people to live without constantly being dependent on the system. For every move, you need a permit. Unless you want to move inside the West Bank. But other than that, if you want, and in all, you know, this is another subject for another lecture, why Palestinians don't have work in Palestine and they have to come to work in Israel. That's another subject altogether. So, you know, there is a dependency on crossing these checkpoints. And in order to cross them, you need a permit. It's not a piece of paper. It's like a magnetic card that, like when you go to get money out of the wall, you have this little magnetic card. that's what you get, and that's what, instead of the paper. Now, this sounds like very efficient, but it's not, because even though everything is computerized, the system has a hold on you, which when it wasn't computerized, it didn't have. The hold is much better. They know everything about you. Whenever you crossed, wherever you went to, if you go to fertile treatments or to psychiatrists or whatever you do, everything is registered. You're completely under their boots. They know everything about you all the time. They know it about us as well, but it's another, we can fight the system much better than someone who the system works in Hebrew and he speaks Arabic, which in itself is a problem. But of course, it doesn't have the force and the, what shall I say, the courage and the ability that the Israelis have to fight the system. So,
Hanna,
yes,
there's a question.
yes.
Someone asks, how many checkpoints are between Israel and Palestine, and when were they built, and are they compelling, or you can cross also in illegal passages?
Well, I can't tell you the number now. There are 32 big ones and many, many other, because a checkpoint doesn't have to be a big building. It can be amount of dirt, it can be a few stones, it can be all sorts, it can be a gate, it can be all sorts of things. So there are probably hundreds of them. And you can, Palestinians always found, until the war broke out, they always found ways. Thousands of people came to work in Israel without permits. And of course, the government always tells you that all these, the wall and the checkpoints, and it's all security. Well, don't believe it. It's not security. It's controlling the Palestinians. This is the best way, as I said, bureaucracy. This is the best way to control the system. And the Palestinians are constantly in need of these. And can you imagine the black market that used to be around for getting these permits? Wherever there is such a system, there's always dirt behind it, because people want to live. And if they can't get it in one way, they'll get it in another way. People bought on the black market when the war was going on and they had nothing to eat. They were ready to give their lives for a piece of bread. Don't think that human nature has changed. It hasn't. And people are ready to do everything they can in order to get. So you could cross. There were always holes in the, don't forget, the wall is not a solid wall everywhere. In some places, it's just a fence. And it's so easy to make a hole in the fence and go through. And people, because it was more easier and it didn't have to wait at the checkpoints, and even people who had permits went through there. So the whole story that I told you about Muhammad was to tell you that part of it is the bureaucracy. Now, one of our big projects is to fight the people that are on the blacklists, because wherever there is such a bureaucratic system, there's always a blacklist. And the interesting thing is that over the years, we had an immense success in getting people off the blacklist. Sometimes 70% of all our requests were answered positively. So ask yourself, why were all these people on the blacklist? If we are not lawyers, we're just women, volunteers. If we can get them off the blacklist, something is wrong. Something doesn't fit. And it's something that only proves what I kept saying, that it has nothing to do with security, not nothing, but security is not the main reason that these checkpoints exist. Now, we're often asked, how are you sure that the people that you are helping, that have been restricted, have been on the blacklist, and there are several blacklists, And I forgot to say that there are 110 different kinds of permits. It took us years to learn the system. You need to be a mathematician, a genius to understand this system. And we only have a few women that really understand the systems and know how to tackle it. Most women help us to get the information. They bring us the information, they meet the people, but they don't know what to do. And it's only a group of us that knows how to tackle this problem. And we are known to be, I think we are the greatest expert on the bureaucracy of the occupation. So people ask us, how do you know that these people are not terrorists? Because we are brainwashed. This is what the government tells us, that all these people who come illegal, they are all terrorists. Of course, they are not terrorists. And if from time to time a terror attacks happen, I don't invent them, they happen very often, as you know. Very often, if someone has been illegally in Israel, they make a big fuss out of it. But you shouldn't think of it like that. You should think of it like people who want to live. Now, this has been and is still a big project of ours. And because the system has developed over the years and has changed, and the checkpoints have changed, people don't have to wait for hours any longer. When we first started, people came at 2 o'clock at night in order to cross at 7 o'clock. All these things have vanished since the system. But the idea of the occupation hasn't changed. The everyday, how shall I put it, system is maybe easier, but the idea is still there and is much more sophisticated and more difficult to fight because it is more sophisticated and it's inhuman. You don't speak to anyone any longer. It's a system. It's like speaking to the computer. You know, I don't live in peace with my computer. I have the feeling that the genie is going to jump out of the computer and eat me alive. Whenever I have this feeling, which of course is idiotic, I think of the Palestinians. That's the way they regard the system. The genie is going to come out, and he does come out very, very often. So I'm trying to tell you a bit of the history of all these things. But of course you will ask me, and I've been talking for a long while, you will ask me, what has changed since the war has happened? Now, what happened on the 7th of October, I think we can all agree that this was a terrible event. The Israelis try to describe it as something that happened out of the blue. Well, it didn't happen out of the blue. It happened because of a long, long, long fight that goes on since 48, and even I think it goes on since 82, when the first settlers came to Palestine. When I was a child, and as I told you, I'm 88 years old, when I was a child and went to school in Israel, in Palestine of those days, I was taught that the people without a country came to a country without people. Well, we didn't come to an empty country. There were people here. It is true that Palestine is an artificial state that was done by the nations that won the First World War, that won World War I and divided the Middle East. And they didn't divide it in a logical way. They divided it out of many, many different reasons. And Palestine really, the Palestinians, it's not that they weren't a people. They were a people before, but they didn't have a country in that sense. But they were always there. It's not like I was told that they were not there. They were there. Maybe they were called differently, and maybe we were also different when we lived in Poland and when we live in Haifa. We are not the same. We have developed over the years and changed over the years. So we didn't come to an empty country. And everything that happened, and all the wars and all the bloodshed and everything that happened has a history, and there are two sides here. They're not equal. They're definitely not equal. One is an occupier and one is occupied. But both sides play a part in this horrible, bloody situation. And even though what the Hamas did on that day is unacceptable, and you can't even imagine such a horrible thing. But I can understand, and I think everyone can understand, that people felt that they need to revenge. But as you know, the worst advice you can get is to work under the feeling of revenge. It has terrible consequences that don't help you get rid of the revenge feeling and bring a situation where there is more hatred and more bloodshed and hunger and whatever you read in the papers and hear. And it's getting worse and worse and worse from day to day. But it hasn't been paradise before the 7th of October. People in the Jordan Valley, for instance, or all over the place, they were constantly covered by the settlers. All these if they tell you that there is a legal settlement, don't believe it. All the settlements, big, small outposts, everything is illegal. And occupation in itself is a legal thing. You are allowed to occupy. The question is, what do you do after you occupied? What are your rights and what are your responsibilities after you occupy? You're not allowed to take the occupied land. You're not allowed to take his art. You're not allowed to take his archaeology. You're not allowed to take his water. You're not allowed to take the opposite. You are responsible that he has water, that he has electricity, that he has food, that he has enough food, that he can work his fields, all the rest. Those are your responsibilities. You are allowed to occupy. And of course, all these rules came out of World War II, but no one thought that an occupation will be 70 years. They thought a year, 2 years, and you go home. And here we are, and we haven't gone anywhere. We are still there. And now these settlers, they come from an outlook on life that I personally don't share. They will tell you that it's written in the Bible that this is our land. And sort of people came back to their homeland. But that is, even if it's written in the Bible, this is not, I don't know how it's called, when you buy a house, you get a piece of paper that this is your house. We haven't registered this land and we can't register this land, and it's not our land. And if the Israelis talk about it as public land, it's not public land. It's questioning who is the public here? And where is this public land? And how come that the government supports these illegal settlers who make the lives of the Palestinians hell on an everyday basis? Of course, you can say that the big cities, maybe some of them can stay there or are acceptable in any way. But all these outposts that are on Palestinian private lands, many of them, that are definitely against the international law, that are against human rights, that are against human people. When they come out, they have guns, these settlers, and they have the government behind them, and nothing ever happens to them, even if the Palestinian is brave enough to put in a complaint by the police, which very often changes around and makes him the victim, the perpetrator, instead of being the victim. It happens every day. And getting to the police station, inside the settlements, where he can't go in. He needs someone to come out to the gate of the settlement and bring him into the police station. Can you imagine the situation? Why would he go into all this trouble when he knows in advance that nothing is going to come out of it? That he can put in the opposite. He will be on the light of the security. He's a complainer. It's a dangerous situation. You need to be very brave to do it, especially as you know that the settlers are not going to be punished. Nothing is going to happen. And very often you get the punishment. Or you have, you know, you graze on your own land, but you have an unfortunate illegal settler next to you. And he bothers you all the time. And he disperses your flock. And he doesn't let you graze your flock. And he does terrible things to you. And he kills your animals and he shoots at you and he hits you and he does whatever you hear and read. And you know in advance that even if you complain, nothing is going to happen. And cases where something is happening are so rare. Maybe 10%, even that is maybe exaggerated. So think about this kind of life. So even if you agree that the Israelis have also a right to self-determination, no one, I don't think there's any doubt about that, and so have the Palestinians. But think about this kind of life for year after year after year after year. And the hatred that it brings about, and the impossible situation that there is. And you know, the idea that you are on blacklist and you have no way to fight it. You need us to fight for you to get off the blacklist. And if you don't know that we exist, I mean, we go around and give our private, don't forget, we don't have an office. We operate from home on our private telephones and our private machine, computers and printers and whatever. And we drive in our own cars. We have nothing. We are a volunteer organization. So think about it. We do our best. We give our addresses, you know, on our, we have a badge that we wear. Supposedly gives us some legitimacy to be there. Of course, it doesn't. But on the other side, we have the list who you can turn to when you are in need. But we don't meet 3 million, 4 million Palestinians. We hope that they would tell each other. And we do have people turn to us for help. And we do our best. We are not always successful, but we do our best. One of the questions that I'm always asked is, how does the government react to us? Do they listen to us? Well, there was a long time when they listened to us. Not that they changed anything, but they covered their backs in case that we get to the International Court of Law, which we are now there. We finally got there. But they knew that this is going to happen one day. And then they can say, look, we've always talked to human rights organizations. And us being women and old women, what do we understand? That's what they always say to us. You don't understand security. Well, these men at 30, we've now seen how much they understand. I think we understand much more. It's not, you know, science that you can't learn. It's very simple. And so, of course, we are women and old women. They think they can tell us any story and we will just be fascinated by their uniforms and their rank. But that, of course, is not the case. And I think we do understand very well. And they did talk to us for a long time, as I said, in order to cover their backs. And we could help a lot of people. I think we helped thousands of people over the years. We opened checkpoints. There were times when during the second Intifada, when they closed the checkpoints for hours and hours and hours, and people stood in the rain and in the sun, and there's no toilet and there's no water, and it was terrible. And we did manage to help open these checkpoints and help individuals that turn to us, get them permits, help them get to hospitals, get them see their families, whatever, be buried. Some people want to be buried in their homeland, wherever they came from. All sorts of, we did help, but we didn't finish the occupation, and we never thought we would finish the occupation. And I was asked, one of the questions was, have we been successful? We didn't get out to be successful. Human rights is something that takes years and years and years. You have to look forward. You can't expect to have success. Is it a success that we managed to open the checkpoints at 4 o'clock instead of 7 o'clock? I can't imagine how happy we were when this happened. But think about it, it's idiotic. What we wanted to achieve is to close the checkpoints, to let people move freely inside the bigger borders, inside the green line or wherever. Move, freedom of movement. But you know, you have to be happy with small successes. They're not success. If I help the person to get to a hospital, did I do a good thing? Yes, I helped him get to the hospital. But on the long range, I bettered the occupation. I gave him another venue through which he can somehow live under this occupation. But we came out to finish the occupation, but we realized, and this is something that bothers us on a day, every one of us that has been there for many years has been confronted with this question: am I doing the right thing? Am I not bettering the occupation, furthering the occupation, make it more livable instead of finishing it? And if you ask me personally, I do it for myself. That when I look in the mirror, when my day will come, I will say I've done the best I could at a given moment. Maybe you should do it in a different way. Maybe I'm doing the wrong way, but this is the only way that I know how to do it. And I can't sit here and see this happening and do nothing. Sit quietly and say it's not my business. Or, you know, the government should solve the problem. And of course, can you imagine how hated we are? Can you imagine what they say to us? You know, the soldiers, they tend to use, no, suddenly the word, to curse. They curse a lot. That's an interesting subject by itself, because when the soldier curses, he says something that, for instance, we are constantly cursed. We don't, you know, it doesn't rub off on us. Okay, it rubs off. So we cursed us. It's not, for Palestinians, it's a different story altogether. And so it's not pleasant. And I could use my time sitting in my nice flat, reading a good book, going to the theater, listen to lectures, do other things. It's not easy to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go out to the field. It's not a pleasure, and you get older. We're not young women any longer. We have members that are 98. I'm not the oldest member in this.
Hanna?
Yes.
Okay, there are two questions.
I want to first answer the question that you already said. Someone asked, why are we only women? As I told you in the beginning, we thought that we would operate in a better way. If you ask me today, I'm a member of two other organizations, Yesh Din and Iranim, and those are mixed men and women. And today, I would join an organization where there are men and women. I think it's easier. On the other point of view, we didn't want to take part in the military discourse of the Israeli society. And men in this country, as you know, now women too. But when we first started 20 years ago, nearly 22 years, 23 years ago, women didn't play the same role in the army as they do today. And we didn't want to be in this position that a man comes to the chair, you know, they have different hats. The different units of the army have, some are green and some are red and some are all sorts of colors. We didn't want to be in the situation where they would say, I've been in the same unit and I use this gun and you use that gun. And we didn't want to be part of all this militaristic discourse, which also men go to the army. Now women too, but in those days, men went to the army for many, many years You know, the Israeli army is basically based on the reservists. It's not based on the regular army. There are not enough soldiers. The main body of the army is the reservists. Someone asked me if women are more active in human rights organizations than men. Not in Israel. There are plenty of men who are very active. We just decided to stay women alone, but in the other organizations that I'm a member and other organizations that I'm not a member of, like Breaking the Silence, I think you've listened to, didn't you say that you listened to Breaking the Silence, or the Forum of the Bereaved Families? They are all mixed. And there are many men who are very interested in looking the occupation into the eye, which is a rather newer organization. They go mainly to the southern part of the southern hills of Hebron, where life is hell. And people there are, very many are needing, people that they are on the lower level of society. They have a lot of problems. And they are treated in a horrible way. And they also go to the Jordan Valley, where, believe me, life there for the Palestinians is very near to hell. I always used to say to volunteers who come from abroad to be here, that if you think that you've sinned in this world in order that you'll be punished in the other world, in hell, go for a month to Hebron and you'll be prepared for hell in your other life. So this was one of the questions. Someone asked, what do we want to achieve by going to these pre-military colleges, or whatever they are called? We don't want to achieve anything. We know that we don't achieve anything, but at least they hear. And if they ask us to come, we all work on the system that if anyone asks us to talk, we come and talk. Even if we know that nothing is going to change, and we are not going to convince them of anything, but they heard us. They were annoyed with us. They said terrible things to us, but we were there and they heard that there is another voice. This was one of the questions that I asked. I don't know if we have convinced, someone asked if we have convinced anything. We don't go out to convince. We say to them in advance, to everyone, we don't come to convince you of anything. We come to tell you a story that we experience on a daily basis. Now, if anyone has any other questions, I'm here to answer.
Okay, there are 3 more questions. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Now, one asked how to ensure the safety of the women helping out when they know so clearly how to tackle the system and are helping the Palestinians. One could imagine their safety is at risk. How does this influence their life in Israel?
Doesn't influence our life at all, because we know up till today, everything can change. Up till today, we were attacked, but not by the system, by the settlers. We have 2 or 3 cases where the injuries were serious, ended up in hospital for a long time. It happened, but usually because, as I said, we are women, old women, elderly women, we're not taken seriously enough to be in danger. And I have to tell you that we have never, ever been attacked by the Palestinians. I think that their attitude to us is different than it is to other human rights organizations, because they know that we don't work on the long system. We help them now, today. We don't change the occupation, but we help Muhammad, our friend from Hebron, to get a permit to stay with his wife in Jerusalem. That's all we want to achieve. We can't, On the long run, we say on our badge that we are against the occupation and for human rights. Now here I have to say something. Who is taking away the human rights? The system, the government. Who do we turn to get back the human rights? The system, the government. Can you see the conflict? In the morning I say against you, and in the afternoon I come licking your boots. Not for myself, I don't need anything from you. I can get it. But for the Palestinians, there is a conflict here. Are we doing the right thing? And what do they understand when we come to them? What does the government understand? Here we are. We are humane. We are the most humane people in the world. And we listen to this human rights organization, especially like us, that they don't see a danger in us. This is covering your back. Here, I've been talking to human rights organizations. I didn't take them serious. When they closed the door, I say, did you see this old woman coming down here? What does she understand? But at least when we get there, they talk to us. They supposedly listen to us. And from time to time, if it serves their purpose, they also do what we ask them to do. But we haven't changed the system, and we never thought that we would change the system. We wanted to people should be aware, and everyone should want to change the system, not just us few people, few women. We hope that people will understand, that we will explain to them that we're talking about a human being and this is against human rights. But when you say I'm against the occupation and I'm a political organization, political organizations don't talk to the system, they demonstrate, they shout, and we come and ask them to do us a favor and let Muhammad cross. So think about it, but we're not in physical danger, usually not. I mean, everyone, you can get killed crossing the street. I mean, there's always danger that something, but up till now, touch wood, nothing happened.
Good.
Other than the settlers are very violent. Confronting the settlers is it's more difficult than confronting the soldiers, much more.
There is another question. Someone asks us, why do you say that you're allowed to occupy just because it was made by the powers in 1948?
According to the international law, occupation is legal. I didn't write the international law. This is what the international law says. Occupation is legal. But the way we operate the occupation, that's where we are. That's what is illegal. Because if you read what is written there, you read that we have to behave in a completely different way. And that we are not keeping to the international law on an everyday basis. The fact that we live there in the occupied territories, what are we talking about? The settlers, who are the settlers? They live in a land that is occupied. It's not ours. We are not children. This is my toy. This is not our toy. This is someone else's toy. And we have taken it away. But we haven't taken it away like the settlers think forever and ever and ever after. No. It's given to us, or we've taken it in order to let these people get at the end to their right to self-determination. This is what this is all about. But occupation in itself, if you read the international law, is legal.
Good. And yet another question, a woman that joined later. What has changed after October 7th in the West Bank and the
That's a good question. Everything has changed because they closed all the entrances to every single city or village in the West Bank. Everything is closed. 90,000 people crossed only at the checkpoints in Jerusalem every day to work. They have no work for the last half year. These are not people who make millions. They don't have reserves. They fight for their daily bread. Yesterday Ramadan started. Ramadan is a very costly holiday because you have to have a serious meal every evening where you invite your family and your friends. You give donations to the poor. You buy sweets for the last meal. These are all expensive things. People don't have the money. They haven't worked for half a year. Their roads are closed. Even to get to Palestinian, the biggest Palestinian hospitals are in Jerusalem and in Nablus. If you live in a little village somewhere and you need a specialist, you need to get to these hospitals, but you can't. The road is closed. There are no permits. No one gets a permit. To get a permit today is, if it was difficult before, it's impossible now. We are completely at a standpoint. We can't do anything. We can't help these people. We hear it every day. We get frustrated. We get angry. We get worried. And you know, after all these years, we made friends in the West Bank. People that we have been dealing with for years, like Muhammad and his family. They are people that are near to our hearts. We've known them for so many years. We become friendly, even though we don't speak language very often. But we find a way. And when we meet each other, we hug each other. And we bring each other presents at holidays. All this is finished, gone. There's no movement. Can you imagine the situation? No work. Getting children to school is difficult. Everything has changed. And the settlers are so violent. They've always been violent. But the violence that you see in the last 5 months is out of any, I can't even describe it. You would sleep at night if I told you. It is awful. It is terrible. Not to speak about what we do in Gaza. And don't forget, Israelis that don't watch international channels don't see half the things that you see. Of course, I have to mention that, you know, we are also, you know, no one talks about the hostages. They are vanished, forgotten in abroad. I listen every night to international channels, every evening. They're hardly ever mentioned. These are, but of course the revenge, as I said before, is terrible. But also the revenge in the West Bank. Even though these, you know, most of these people have done nothing. They're not Hamas. And you know, we didn't mention that coming at night into people's homes and supposedly looking for ammunition or looking for some wanted people. Some of it is just to make their life hell. And these nightly intrusions into your home, just think about it. Just go to bed and think that any minute someone can come in with their guns and their dogs into your own home and on the way steal whatever they can steal. Not all the soldiers steal, of course, not everyone is violent. There are many people who are not violent, but the system is violent and the brainwashing is violent. So, and this has only become worse and worse through this horrible war. And you know, everyone is near to their own. You know, if your friend lost his child, you feel a different way than if someone that you have never heard of in another, you think is your enemy, has lost their children. But these are all human beings. Don't think that it hurts less to a mother of a Palestinian when her child, this is what they tell us, that they don't care. This is rubbish. Of course they care. Any one of us who has children knows that we want to die before our children. We don't want to bury our children. And to be shot and all this, my grandson was serving in Gaza. he came out, not to speak that he lost his hearing on that occasion, but he came out completely shocked. War is not a game. It's not a pleasure. And what's happening there, and people being moved from here to there and there to here, and terrible. And in the West Bank, I don't think it's, even though they're not moved in that way, their life has become worse than it has been before, and it's been terrible before. There's no way, I can't, I don't have the words to tell you how terrible it is. Just put yourself in their place. Think about it. You get up in the morning, and this is what you have to confront. You never know what's going to happen next. Some crazy settlers in the Jordan Valley can come to your home in the middle of the night with his horse or with his dogs. Dogs are in the Islam, they are unholy creatures. They have and these dogs are dangerous, believe me. Just think about it. You sleep in your tent somewhere where you've been living for years. So your grandfather has been living there. Suddenly, at night, a settler who's come there yesterday comes and makes your life hell. Just put yourself in the place of these people.
Okay, we have a few more questions, but right now we'll open it to the public. So Rebecca, Anonymous, and Louisa, you can say, you can ask it personally, okay? Najwa? I didn't introduce our dear Najwa Dutsdar.
Yes, I just have to
So please,
change everyone to.
okay, Rebecca, you ask first your question, and then where can we see the recording?